what's up guys, it's Kelly, and today I'm sharing my favourite books that I read in 2018. So I went through my Goodreads list and I'm actually pretty happy with my reading for 2018. I think I am going to do a full reading wrap up for the year, like with my stats for everything. So keep an eye out for that. This is just my absolute favourite books that I read this year. And there are quite a few, so I'm not going to ramble too much more, we're just going to get into the books. So first up, a series that I kind of was introduced to in January is the Phoebe and Her Unicorn graphic novels, which are so lovely and so charming, and I absolutely adore them. I've read 2 or 3 this year, and they are absolutely brilliant. It is about a series about a girl called Phoebe who finds a unicorn, and they go on lots of adventures, and it kind of also just chronicles their normal daily life together. We talk about Phoebe's struggles with school, with summer camp. It's very relatable for a child. It's very relatable for an adult who can remember what it was like to be a child. She has problems making friends, and then she does get friends, she kind of doesn't know what to do with them, and it's all of these things that make being a child difficult, and all these things that make being a child special, presented in a really fun format that is just lovely. Really sweet stories, beautiful artwork. I highly recommend it for kids and adults alike. It's just all around a super fun time, and generally with quite an important message. I gave Unicorn vs. Goblins 4 stars. Something I want to mention is I'm not including rereads on this list because otherwise, you know, we'd be going through every single Sarah J Maas book ever. Except in this one case I am including a reread because I reread The Raven Boys and then I read the rest of the Raven Cycle series, and that series just as a whole is going on my favourite books of 2018. I loved it so much. That series took me on such a roller coaster of emotions. It made me fall so deeply in love with these characters, and it also made me realise that I'm becoming an adult because I read The Raven King and I was like, I'm reading this book about really attractive, absolutely perfect in every way male characters, and I'm just like, I want my precious little babies to be safe. Like, don't do that, you're gonna get hurt. Like, you need some sleep, you need to eat some real food, you need to go to school. That was the point at which I realised that I'm an adult, because I no longer want to kiss the heroes in YA books. I want to kiss them on the forehead and send them to bed with a hot meal in their stomach. But if you haven't already read the Raven Cycle series, there are tons of reviews of it on YouTube. I don't need to talk too much about it. Just do yourself a favour, do some research into it, and if it sounds like your thing, read it because they are wonderful. I gave The Raven Boys 4 stars, The Dream Thieves 5 stars, Lily Blue 5 stars, and The Raven King 5 stars. I finished book 1 and read book 2 of the Wheel of Time series. It's a high fantasy series, it's a very long series, so if you are going to get into it, you need to be ready to commit for the long haul. I figure if I average 2 books a year, I can finish the rest of the series in 6 years, and that's pretty decent. So, no, I kid. I am going to try to pick up my pace with these in 2019, and maybe read like 3 or 4, but yeah, if you're looking for a really like intricate, brilliantly written, high fantasy series, then I definitely recommend the Wheel of Time series. I read The Eye of the World, which is book 1, and I read The Great Hunt, which is book 2. I gave them both 4 out of 5 stars. I did enjoy The Great Hunt a little more than I enjoyed The Eye of the World. I also read it a lot faster, just because I found that it was much faster paced, and all around it was just a bit easier to read. You also got to see a lot more of the character development, and the direction that the story is going in gets shaped a lot better in book 2, so if you do read book 1 and you struggle a bit, push through. Book 2 is just generally a more enjoyable reading experience, and I have been told that book 3 is where things really start to get interesting. I read Call Me By Your Name by Andre Assaman, which I really enjoyed parts of. I didn't enjoy the ending, and I thought that some of his choices for the choices that the characters made just didn't make sense, but on the whole I really loved reading the book. His prose style is just absolutely beautiful. The writing and the descriptions are so lovely and rich and lyrical. The storyline almost became secondary to me. I was reading it for the writing because the writing was just so phenomenal. And I gave Call Me By Your Name 4 out of 5 stars. I read I Still Dream by James Smythe, or Smith, I still don't know how to pronounce this, and this is about a girl called Laura who creates an artificial intelligence program called Organon. It starts off as just like a sounding board for her in her teens, somewhere she can vent her frustrations. It's a bit like a journal, but it talks back to her, gives her advice, and the book skips ahead 10 years at a time and follows her as she keeps progressing Organon, as technology keeps advancing and she can keep creating new features in him and making Organon become better and stronger. And it was also a really, really scary thing that shows what artificial intelligence can do and why we should not be messing with computers. Like, why are we letting computers become smarter than us? This is how every scary sci-fi movie starts. Don't do it. Don't do it. It will make you want to turn off your cell phone. It will make you feel like everyone is watching you and that the computers know what you're doing. But it is an absolutely fantastic read, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I read Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, which I really enjoyed. It started off a bit slow for me. Well, not slow. I'd started off and I wasn't a big fan of the writing. I pushed through because I was really enjoying the story, but about halfway into it, the writing really picked up for me, and I started enjoying it a lot more. Obviously, everyone knows what Ready Player One is about now because of the film that came out, but basically it's about this billionaire that dies and he leaves all of these Easter eggs in the Oasis, which is this virtual reality world that he's created, and the first person to find the eggs, which open gates and stuff, and it gets a little bit complicated and difficult to explain, but basically the first person to find all of these Easter eggs and essentially clear the Oasis will become the heir to his estate, his fortune, will become the ruler of the Oasis. And it's a really fun read. It is set in 2048, but the guy who dies in the book was born in the 80s, or was born in the 70s, but he grew up in the 80s and is obsessed with 80s pop culture, so all of the Easter eggs that he hides are related to 80s pop culture. So there's Monty Python references, there's John Hughes references. If you're a fan of 80s pop culture, I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is such a fun read. If you're not into like gaming, virtual reality and all that kind of stuff, don't let it put you off. I think that as long as you are a fan of pop culture, of 80s pop culture, you will find something in it that appeals to you. It will still excite you. And I gave Ready Player One 4 out of 5 stars. I read A Faraway Magic by Amy Wilson, which was one of the books that was kindly sent to me by Pan Macmillan, and I absolutely adored it. From the moment I read it, which was in about April or June, I was like, this is going to be one of my favourite books of the year. I just knew from the get-go. It's about a girl called Angel who moves to a new school after the death of her parents, and she meets this boy called Bavar, who is quite strange, doesn't really have any friends, seems to have this weird, like, shadowy presence about him. As she learns more about Bavar and his world, she starts to wonder if maybe these shadows that are lurking around him are maybe related to how her parents died. It's a beautiful book about friendship and morality and growing up and becoming the person that you're meant to be without necessarily having to live in the shadow of your parents. It is just so good. I highly recommend it to adults and children alike. I don't think it got nearly the recognition that it deserved. It's beautifully written, it's so atmospheric. It presents a really lovely, wholesome male-female friendship, which I think is so important in kids' books. And it also has moments of being really dark, where you're really genuinely scared of the characters. And I really appreciate when middle grade books have those kinds of stakes and you do fear for the characters, and it makes the whole thing seem a lot more real. There is a fantastical element to it, it's got kids fighting monsters, which is always fun, and just all round it's absolutely amazing. Do yourself a favour and pick it up, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read the book that I've been talking about for the last 6 months, pretty much non-stop, and that is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I loved this book so much. So much. This is definitely in my top 3 favourite books of the year. The other 2 are still coming, and I'll mention them when they come, although you can probably already guess what they are. The Name of the Wind was just everything that I needed. I wanted an exceptional high fantasy that would suck me in and completely immerse me in this wonderful, fantastical, magical world, and it did all of that and more. The writing was absolutely exquisite. I cannot get enough of Patrick Rothfuss's writing, which is why I need day 3 to come out so I can read book 2. Just everything about The Name of the Wind was absolutely exquisite. I have recommended it to countless customers who are looking for a fantasy series. Although it is high fantasy and it is very chunky, it's about 750 pages, and I think that intimidates people. I don't think that you need to be a huge fantasy fan to read it. A lot of people who don't typically read fantasy but want to get into fantasy are very intimidated by high fantasy because it's a new world, it's a magic system you have to learn, the language use generally requires a bit of concentration to understand. That is not the case in The Name of the Wind at all. The writing is lovely, the language use is amazing, there is a new magic system that you have to understand, and there is a whole world that you have to wrap your head around, but it is done in such a way that it doesn't feel difficult. Like, reading it never felt like work, and of course I gave that 5 out of 5 stars. I read The Waiter by Matthias Feldbacken, which I have spoken about in a recent wrap-up, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I really enjoyed this book. It's about a waiter, who works in this very expensive restaurant in Oslo, and the whole book is basically just him reflecting on his job as a waiter, commenting on the customers that come into the restaurant, their relationships with each other, their relationships with him. It's quite stream of consciousness, there isn't really any plot, so do be aware of that if you decide that you want to read it. You definitely need to be a fan of character-driven stories to enjoy this, and I really enjoyed it, but it's not for everyone. I've seen some very negative reviews of it and I understand them. However, I really enjoyed it and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. In October, I read The Shining by Stephen King. My battery is busy dying, so I need to hurry things along. Everyone knows The Shining. Everyone pretty much knows what it's about, so I'm just gonna say that this was definitely my favourite Stephen King book that I've read so far. The writing just went above and beyond anything that I've read of his before. The storyline was so gripping, so exciting, and so dark and twisted, and kept me gripped and kept me excited the whole way through it, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Then one that was very surprising for me was Tower of Dawn by Sarah J Maas. You might be thinking, but Kaylee, it's a Sarah J Maas book, why were you surprised? Well, if you've watched my October wrap-up where I talk about this, I don't like Cale, or rather I didn't like Cale. I didn't dislike him, but I didn't like him. He wasn't one of my favourite characters. I was not looking forward to reading this book. That's why it's taken me a year to read it. And then I read it, and it was so perfect and so wonderful and so much everything that I needed it to be and so much everything that I wanted from a Sarah J Maas book that I loved it, and it became one of my favourite books of the year. It made me love Cale, it made me love some other characters who are new to the story at this point. It gives you some shocking plot twists, and it was kind of a low-key book, like not a lot happens, but it sets up a lot of important things for Kingdom of Ash. And all around it was just such a great reading experience. I loved it. I loved the writing. We get to see a very different part of the world than we're used to, so that world building was amazing. Getting to see a whole new cast of characters that were so interesting, so different, getting to understand a different culture, all of that I just loved so much. I loved seeing Cale develop as a character, and that just, it made me love him. He is now one of my favourites. Not one of my babies, but one of my favourites. And in a series with so many characters and so many wonderful characters, that is saying quite a lot still. And this book that I was expecting to be like a 3-star read ended up being a 5-star read. The next book will come as absolutely no surprise to any of you. It is another one in my top 3 of 2019. I loved it. Kingdom of Ash. I have done a full review of this, and obviously I can't talk too much about it without giving spoilers for the rest of the series, so if you are interested to hear my thoughts, then go ahead to that review, which I will leave a link to. But yeah, it was exactly as I had anticipated. It was heartbreaking and beautiful and amazing and wonderful and epic, and it was the perfect conclusion to this series that I have loved so much for almost 2 years. So that, of course, was a 5-star read for me as well. Then the last book to make up the trilogy of my 3 favourite books of 2019, I keep saying 2019, of 2018, was Wanda Smith by Jessica Townsend. This is the sequel to Nevermore. I have reviewed this one as well as Nevermore, so once again, if you want to hear an in-depth review of what it's about and what my thoughts were, I'll leave links to those reviews. But Wanda Smith was also just so magical and wonderful and lovely and delightful, and like with A Faraway Magic, although it is a middle grade book, it still has moments of real darkness where you do fear for the characters. You do have to be genuinely worried that they might die, they might get seriously hurt, something might happen to them, that they're not going to come back in the next book, and you're not going to be okay with that because she makes you become so attached to these sweet little 11-year-old angels who are so far from being angels but just are such wonderful characters. I love this universe, I love these books. They are everything that both my childhood and adult self need. And it makes me so sad because although there's a lot of hype about these online, like my Nevermore review got over 1,000 views, which for me is insane. I think my only other video that has that many views is my 50 Shades of Grey review. So like there is definitely hype and buzz about these books online, but in South Africa they just are not popular. They don't sell. No one wants to read these books, and I don't understand why, because they are so amazing and magical. So I try and force them on every single customer who comes in looking for a kid's book, and sometimes it works, and hopefully by myself I can spread the love for this book and make more people aware of it and make more people love it, and soon we will just have a whole world of people who love Nevermore, as it should be. This, of course, was a 5-star read. And then the last book on my list was one that, again, surprised me, not because I thought that I wouldn't enjoy it. I was expecting to enjoy it, but I wasn't expecting it to become one of my favourite books of the year, but it really, really was, and that was Transcription by Kate Atkinson. So this one, my boyfriend read, and he really enjoyed it. He gave it 5 stars, and then he recommended that I read it. Actually, he challenged me to read it, which is pretty much the way to get me to do anything. You know, saying, I bet you won't do this is pretty much a way to get me to do it. This is a book set in the 1940s, well, mostly set in the 1940s in England, and it follows an 18-year-old girl called Juliet, who is working as a typist for MI5. MI5 is the real one, right? And then MI6 is the one from the Alex Rider books. Now, of course, in this book that is all about MI5, I can't actually find a reference to them. I'm pretty sure it's MI5. So she's part of this operation where they have an undercover agent, and he gets Nazi sympathizers to come to his flat for tea, and then he gets information from them, and it's her job to transcribe all of these meetings. Hence the name of the book. And I do like historical fiction. I have read historical fiction in the past that I've really enjoyed, and I do want to read more of it in the future, but generally I enjoy older historical fiction. I enjoy stuff from like the medieval times, and you know, generally things that are like pre-1900s. So yeah, although I was expecting to enjoy this, I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. You know, adult historical fiction, when I've pretty much been reading exclusively fantasy for most of the year, was a little bit out of my comfort zone, but all around it was such an enjoyable read. The writing is so lovely, Kate Atkinson is so witty and clever. It has the craziest plot twist that makes you feel like you need to start reading the book again, because so you can see all the clues that were laid for it. The whole thing was just so cleverly written, so cleverly done, and so masterfully layered to hide her true intentions. If you're looking for a really, really clever read that's going to keep you hooked, that's got really lovely writing, I highly recommend this. Also, I want to say on a side note, if you are someone who primarily reads YA, and you're looking for a book to get you into adult fiction, I would recommend this one, because Juliet, for most of the book, because it does flash between time zones, but for the most part we're in the 1940s, where Juliet is 18. And although in some ways she's very much an adult, she's been taking care of herself since she was like 16 and her mom died, but she also in some ways is so much a typical 18-year-old. Half the time when she's talking to her boss, all she can think is like, kiss me, Perry, love me, take me in your arms and ravish me. So although she's a great character and a very well-rounded character, at times she is such a silly character that it definitely felt reminiscent of a lot of YA books where something really serious is happening and the protagonists are just like, yeah, now's a good time to bang. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love those kinds of books, but it had very much that kind of feel to it, like this 18-year-old girl who cannot take this extremely serious situation that she's in seriously because she's so concerned with being in love with her boss. And I have to say, this book definitely put me in the mood to read more adult fiction. It's something that I keep trying to push myself to do, and I keep failing, but this book definitely kind of gave me that push that I needed, where I'm actively making more of an effort to read more adult fiction. My 2019 TBR definitely has a lot more adult fiction on it than normal. Overall, this was a really strong read for me. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I really, really enjoyed it, and I definitely recommend it. So those are my favourite books of 2018. It's been a year. It has been a year, but on the whole, it's been a really good reading year for me, and even the books that weren't necessarily favourites, even the books that I only gave like 3 stars to, I've still really enjoyed. I read a lot of books that were really enjoyable but just not necessarily good. Let me know in the comments what your favourite books of 2018 were, and also if you read and enjoyed any of the books on my list. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you all again very soon. Bye!
My life is grounded